first part of sort of 9 parts or 9 months that we've contracted with Vanessa and her clinic. So the whole speaker series will be done by Dr. Lapointe and other clinicians at the Wishing Star Clinic, correct? Mm-hmm. Yes, and we don't actually, I don't have the curriculum yet, but we will get that out to you guys so you can see what's coming. I think we've had trouble securing a June date. Yes? Maybe? I'll check in with your assistant. I know we're booked right through from September until April with our rest of our dates. So we may not get to see you guys until September, but I will let you know through email if we can pull together the June date. I think she was looking at switching a date in your schedule for that. Just a few housekeeping. The bathroom is back out through the kitchen to that main hall and then down the hall on your right. Thank you for not wearing any scents today. Please continue that if you're coming in the future to our group. I put the rest of our dates up there as well as the support group that I also run out of this room on a monthly basis. Casual coffee and chat and talking about such things as our kids and MCFD systems and advocacy and training and resources and things, sharing like that. New and old caregivers, it's a good mix in the room. Yeah, I think we're going to get started with a relationship for life and talk about some of the foundations of attachment today with Dr. Vanessa Lapointe. Cool. Thanks for being here.
11:30.
Yeah.
So it's great to be here. I get to look out and see lots of familiar faces, and nice to be reconnecting with you. And if I haven't met you before, then hopefully you get to become a familiar face over the next several months as we go through our series and other stuff. This is sort of the foundational workshop, I suppose, in the series that we're going to be doing together, although all of the other workshops will kind of be standalone as well. And this one being foundational because it really does provide the whole kind of premise upon which healthy child development rests, and talking about how that healthy foundation develops, and a little bit about what happens when things go sideways in the development of that healthy foundation. A lot of times when we talk about child development, people go very swiftly to things like language development and motor development and all of the things related to sort of the physical and the concrete and that which we can see and touch. But when we're talking about child development, the other piece that needs to be very front and center is the child's understanding of how their relational world works. And in that world, children find themselves, they find their sense of safety in the world, they find the capacity to grow neural networks that are going to allow them to become fully formed, functioning, mature human beings. And if children don't have access to the relationships that they need with their special big people, and or those relationships are not playing out or manifesting or taking hold or growing the way that nature intended, then we don't need to know anything else about the child. We know that their development is going to go sideways in one way or another, because that relationship, the impact of that relationship on the growth of the human brain is so extraordinary that without it, you can't be okay, right? We also know that it plays a huge protective role. And so for children who have faced challenges in life, who have some developmental vulnerabilities, let's say, related to the challenges that they have faced in life, we know that if they have one relationship with a big person, an adult, who got them, right? The kind of big person who could look at them and see them and smell them and know intuitively what it is that they needed. If every child can have a big person like that, just one, it actually is what makes them resilient. It's what allows them to meet better outcomes than what would have ever been dreamt of before. And so it just takes one person to love in a child to change their whole life trajectory and their whole world. And that's because of how that relationship settles into and grabs onto really important neural networks in the brain. So it's not just about airy-fairy, artsy-fartsy, group huggy kind of stuff when we talk about relationship. It's about the science of child development and how the relationship we form with the children that we're loving on literally seeps into their bodies and becomes part of how their brains grow, and in turn, part of how they grow, how their cells grow. I want to open by sharing this quote with you. What does it mean to be held in another's mind? Why does it matter, and how does such a feeling develop? Everything that we know about children leads to the conclusion that they seek human connection, not only to survive, but for its own sake. They are born looking for us. Given a choice of what to look at in their first hours, it is always the human face that they choose. Now think about yourselves as adults. Understand that as adults, you are fully formed human beings, more or less. And as adults, think about what it feels like when you come into an awareness or an understanding that somebody else has held you in mind. Like somebody else has been thinking about you. Somebody else has been adjusting the way they're stepping through the world on your behalf to come alongside you and meet a need that you have. Somebody else has taken time, has taken energy, has taken resources, has created space in their own psyche and their own life to make room for you. And now you're going to sort of feel the full weight, the impact of what it is that that person has done just by creating space in their head for you, space in their life. And then having that kind of trickle down and lead to adjustments in how they're feeling the space between you and them. Imagine how magical that feels, right? My eldest son has been away for a few days, and he's going to come home, and I've done some things in his bedroom that I know he's been really waiting for, like he's really wanted it. And my sense of what I hope will happen is that he will come home today at 3 o'clock. I'm going to count down. He's like totally fine, but I'm like, please, could you come home already, right? And my hope is that he will come home, and he will walk into his room, and he will see that in the time we've been apart, he's been in my head, and he's been in my mind. And the way that I've sort of laid everything out for him as the surprise that he'll come home to today will be sort of very tangible, concrete proof that he's been held in mind. And I hope, I know, that that's going to hit him in the feels. You know what I mean? Like that's going to sit with him, and he'll know that he was held in mind. And so that's sort of a concrete, bigger thing. But imagine through the drip drop, drip drop, drip drop of day-to-day life that you had that experience, that you had a big person like that who was giving you that sense of existence, right? That's profound. That settles into your neurons. That becomes part of how you view yourself, how you view your place in the world, and how ultimately you're able to regulate or not regulate around your emotions, right? That's crazy, mind-blowing stuff. To be held in another's mind. Why does it matter, and how does such a feeling develop? Now, children now intuitively, they don't actually know, they know subconsciously and instinctively that when they arrive in the world, they need to find their big person, right? And so when a newborn babe arrives into the world, as soon as they can get their eyes open, they're going to start looking around. Instantly, they're going to start looking around. It's like an instinct. And what are they going to look for? They'll want a boob. they do have that instinct on board. What is like a, do you look how I'm...
An eye.
This is on video? Very close to the boob. I'm here, everybody. Okay, workshop's over. They're looking for eyes, right? That's why, like, when we are around moms who are breastfeeding babies, we want them, for example, to be off their phones, because actually what needs to be happening is they need to be looking into the eyes of their babies while they're feeding them. Part of what goes on when you have a baby positioned at the breast or positioned to be even fed from bottle is that they're the ideal distance from the eyes to be able to make contact and see. And that channel of connection through the eyes is incredibly important in terms of forming the first layers of attachment. right? And so the newborn baby, in addition to looking for the boob, is going to be gazing around the room trying to find your eyes. What happens when the newborn babe finds your eyes? Have you ever had a little newborn baby and their unblinking kind of stare find your eyes? Look at you all go to mush, even though I'm saying that. Right? Like there's something visceral that happens inside of us when a newborn baby finds our eyes and starts to stare. And the visceral is going on inside of us because what's happening in our brains. And in our brains, you're getting all sorts of squirts of neurotransmitters that are filling your neural synapses, causing you to fall deeply in attachment with the baby. Why? Because the baby looked at you. Do you see how powerful? And it's not just like you're feeling the warm feels. You actually have like oxytocin flooding out. You have serotonin flooding out. All these chemicals that are chemically and soulfully now bonding you to that child. Okay? And so babies know. They come out knowing that you're the best vet. You're the one they need. They're trying to find you. They know it from the word go. And from that moment forward, everything about how they are, how they behave, how they be in their day-to-day life, minute by minute and second by second, everything's going to drive at making sure that connection stays alive. And when they're not getting enough, or when the connection has been ruptured, or when other things go on in that connection, they're going to feel a need, an alarming need related to that, where they have to make sure that they get it done, right? And I can see by the nods in the crowd, you know a little bit about what that looks like, right? It's not all warm and fuzzy. It's challenging, and it can be awful, and messy, and constant, and ongoing, and very, very difficult. And they're so relentless about it, because it's not just a want. It's not just that we want to be loved, that we want to have the warm feels from the big people in our lives, but we need it. As human beings, as a social species, we cannot survive without it. And when you're a child, and your very existence depends on your big people getting you and seeing you and knowing you and smelling you and loving you, your very existence depends on them getting that, you're going to do everything in your power to make sure that it happens, even if it makes those big people crazy. Ready? All right. Let's talk a little bit about how the brain develops. Now, some of you have seen this drawing before. If you were at the workshop series last year, you will know that I drew that child. There's a reason that I'm not an artist. My mother is an artist, and I think it's so curious that she and I are related to one another. I just have none of that in me at all. So this is going to be our child. Imagine this is the child that you are invested in, the child that you are growing up, the child that you have hopes and dreams of as they sort of venture forward into life. And I want you right now to call into your mind's eye the picture of a living, breathing, real child that you're loving on, so that you actually can see them there. And maybe it'll be more than one. And I want you now to fast forward the clock, let's say 30 years for that child. What do you hope will be going on in life for them 30 years from now? And most of us will land on a group of about 4 different kind of universal hopes and dreams that we have for the children that we're invested in. Most of you, if I were to take a sort of poll around the room, would say that you hope 30 years from now that child is going to be happy. That they'll have some sense of sort of contentment with the life that they're living. Most of you would also say that you hope that that child will be successful, which doesn't mean they're making piles of money and doctors and lawyers and dentists and all that stuff, but they're successful in the way that we define success, right? Most of you would say that you hope they will have figured out how to relate to other people so that they can have deep and meaningful relationships with those people, right? Because we know we're a social species and we need that in order to thrive in this life that we're living. And, oh, there's a very little baby. You love it when little babies just pop up like that. Most of you, I'm all distracted now. I got all the feels. Maybe look at me and I'm going to be most of you would also say that you hope that the child you have grown up will be contributing to the world as much as they're taking from it, that they've become sort of a valued member of society on some level, right? So you want them to be happy, you want them to be able to engage in deep and meaningful relationships with other human beings, you want them to be successful, and you want them to be contributing members of the world that they live in, okay? These are the hopes and the dreams that we hold for the children that we love on 30 years down the road. Now, how do you grow a child to actualize that kind of a life? How do you grow a child so they'll become an adult 30 years from now who's living the dream, right? And if we were going to get very concrete about it and very sort of elemental and scientific about it, how you grow that kind of a human being is you make sure that you've grown for them the kind of brain that does those things, right? And more specifically, the kind of brain down in the core of the human brain that does those kinds of things. Now, the way the human brain organizes itself is from the bottom up. So the bottom part of the brain sort of is the part that really is getting a lot of developmental focus and attention early on. And then there's about 6 layers that are going to kind of layer up on top of the bottom part of that brain. And those layers sort of are sequentially formed over time. I mean, they all exist. It's just in terms of how sophisticated they are and how well they're functioning. That's all taking root kind of over time from the bottom on up. Now, if we go down into the base of the brain, which I'm now modeling for you by using my fist as the base of the brain, and then sitting on top of that base is the cortex, or the outer layers of the brain. The cortex is where all of rational thought and problem-solving ability and planning and organizing and all those kinds of like more complex ways of thinking and chewing on information from the world, all of that lives up here in the cortical layers. And that's the icing on the cake. That's what comes later, right? Down in the base of the brain, the area that I've kind of circled for you there, this is where your emotional regulatory systems are housed. So all of the neural tract that's controlling for your emotions so that when you get fired up or dysregulated or undone or you're having a meltdown or a tantrum or you're angry or you're sad or whatever it is, you get all fired up down in this regulatory core. And then the same networks are going to be responsible for having you calm and soothe and regulate and settle, right? That's all happening down in the regulatory core. And so as the child gets fired up and has ongoing experiences of being calmed and soothed, guess what starts to really take root down in the regulatory core of the brain? The capacity for self-soothing, impulse control, emotional regulation. All of that settles in down here as the child has ongoing experiences of being fired up and settled down. So this little monkey in the back is getting kind of fussy, right? And is sort of kicking up a little bit. And immediately there's a big person responding to that and tending to it and bringing the baby back down. And this is going to happen like in the next 24 hours, probably another, I don't know, 214 times. Right? You please don't be sorry. We refuse to accept your apologies. And as it happens 214 more times, the neurons get fired up, the neurons get settled down. How are the neurons getting settled? Look at this magical human who's sitting in the back corner of the room. That's who's settling the neurons. That's who's responding. That's who's calming. That's who's soothing. That's the external brain that's coming alongside the baby's actual brain and showing it the way back down. Now, every day, 214 times 7 days a week, times 4 weeks a month, times 12 months a year, for the next 25 years or so. And that brain is going to become masterful at self-soothing, emotional regulation, impulse management, all of those kinds of things, right? That's all going on down in the core of that brain. As that downstairs part of the brain, the regulatory core of the brain, becomes really solid that way, the other layers then will layer up on top of it in a very solid manner. It's like when you build a building, the secret to a solid structure is a solid foundation, right? So you have to make sure that this part has taken root and been addressed properly. Now you might be 16 years old or 26 years old or 56 years old and never have had that part really taken care of properly. And so even if you were 56 years old and you were, say, going to a psychologist or somebody along those lines in order to figure out why, life is feeling so challenging, if we know that this piece hasn't been addressed, we go back to that. We make that happen. So you might be a 16-year-old who's never had that take root. Guess what we're doing for your brain? We're doing for your brain what this woman's doing for that baby right there. Right? We're going back to that level. Now we're making it look like it needs to look like for a 16-year-old. So you don't get to pick the 16-year-olds and put them on your shoulder. Maybe you do. Right? But we're going to find ways for you to comb their hair for them and rub lotion into their skin and link arms with them while you go for a walk, because this baby is probably getting a lot of, look at even right now. You're so great that you have this baby. It's like this in vivo exposure that we get to use as an example all morning long. So this baby's getting a lot of this movement. How are we going to replicate that movement in the loving presence of a big person who's caring for the 16-year-old? Like, there's ways that we can do that. So we climb back into the brain and we get the foundation settled so that all the other layers can layer up. Because when all the other layers can layer up, then all of a sudden we've got logical thought happening. Good choices can be made. Rational problem solving can unfold, right? And all of that is premised on this foundation of healthy attachment. You have a question?
I just wanted to know, can this happen at any age?
Yes. So neuroplasticity is alive and well across the lifespan. In antiquated approaches to understanding the brain, we thought probably by the time you're 12, the ship has sailed. But we know that we were just very uninformed. We were saying horrible things like that. And so neuroplasticity is alive and well across the lifespan. The brain is constantly adjusting itself and reshaping and reforming based on the external experiences that it's having. So there's this ongoing interplay between the neural structures in the brain and the brain's experiences in the world, and they constantly are going back and forth, and the brain reshapes and reforms accordingly. The basic rule of thumb, though, is that when the brain is young, there's so much neural proliferation. This baby right here is forming, how old is this baby?
10 weeks.
10 weeks. This baby's forming 700 new neural connections per second.
Wow.
Think about that. Mind-blowing, literally, right? 700 new neural connections per second. And as that happens, you have this profound opportunity to climb into the brain, because there's so much growth going on that you can get in there and direct it, right? And so as this sort of incredible neural proliferation, I don't know why that word's so hard for me this morning, goes down, we have a lot of potential and opportunity to get in and do right by that brain, also do wrong by that brain, right? And then as development proceeds, that proliferation of neural connections starts to slow down. The brain gets very smart. It realizes which connections need to be held onto and which ones it's pitching because they're not really important, right? And so it gets more sophisticated in the neural networks that it's holding onto, and the explosion of those connections kind of settles down. So what that means in terms of your question is, yes, neuroplasticity is alive and well across the lifespan, but the older the brain is, because of the reduction in the neural proliferation, the longer and steeper the climb in terms of getting in and exacting real change in those neural networks. Not that
They
it's
don't get the
impossible.
700?
Say again?
You know how you said,
Yeah.
I don't know how to restate it back to you, but you know how you said that they're getting 700 neuro,
Connections.
yes,
second.
connections. So as they get older, there's less connections? Is that what you're-
Yes, less new connections being formed.
Okay.
This is like the heyday of neural development right now.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why we want to make sure, like early intervention, and we get in there and we do right and we take care and all of those things, because we have this incredible opportunity right now.
Yes.
It's so open. And then as we get older, that slows down. It doesn't stop.
Okay.
It just slows down. And the changes in the brain are going to be not so much from new growth, but from interactional adjustments because of the world around. Make sense?
Got it.
Okay, go ahead.
You said that like for an older teenager, like,
Yeah.
you know, comb hair or touch.
Yeah.
Like, does it have to be that, or is it just doing things for them and just being there and whatever?
Absolutely.
Okay.
When I was talking about combing hair and touch, I was making reference to the fact that we would want to sort of emulate the caregiving experiences of the baby in the 16-year-old. Because those caregiving experiences, the way that we shush babies and the way that we get rhythmic with them and we bounce, even rhythmic with them in the shushing, right? We often have sort of a rhythm to that. And there's so much, you're gonna see the first level of attachment, the first foray into forming the attachment relationship is through the senses. So this is sensory-based attachment, right? This baby needs to be with, the baby needs to be held, the baby needs to feel the warmth of the human holding it, the baby needs to smell the human, the baby needs to, I mean, it's all through the senses. That's how the attachment is being formed in the very early goings of life. If you have a 16-year-old who missed out on that, we need to actually go back and provide it. But how do you emulate this in a 16-year-old? Yes?
So I have a 13-year-old that was adopted from Africa. She's 15 now. So how I take those things as two different, what's important to her. So I've watched gone back and watched all the Lindsay Lohan movies again. And she's African, so I dance, but I dance terrible, and she tries to teach me to dance. So that's her with the African movement, right? So stuff that I would never do, but so you have to go back to where their need is for their touch.
That you're meeting them where they're at.
Yeah.
I think I have, I'm just looking for a slide really quick that's kind of cool that I can show you. Which is not part of my slides this morning, but very relevant to the conversation that we were having right now. Although it might have just crashed out my PowerPoint. You know what the lesson is in all of this? Do not download the system update.
Yes.
Ever. It's always just a recipe for disaster. Okay, I'm gonna restart my PowerPoint. I'm not gonna show you that slide, actually. This is the conversation that we're having about going back is pulling from Bruce Perry's work on the neurosequential model of therapeutics. How many of you know who Bruce Perry is? Has he ever, have you heard him speak? Have you heard my embarrassing story about Bruce Perry in the Prince George Airport? I'm going to tell you when the camera's not on. Because I've already way overshared for the camera. You don't need to hear my embarrassing Bruce Perry story from the Prince George Airport.
This is Vanessa's book that's up on the screen right now. If any of you haven't had, I know some of you have had the opportunity to buy it last year when it first came out. But maybe Vanessa in future months can bring some copies along if people don't already have it and they're interested in it. I have a few to lend out too if you'd like that.
Anyways, I'm not going to show you the neuron slide because it's crashing it all out. But I have managed to successfully reopen PowerPoint. We can come back to our workshop. Here we are. So the whole point is that we need to get in and we need to make sure that the foundation of the brain has been formed the way it needs to be formed, for the neural networks to be developing, for that strong foundation to be there so the rest of the brain has the chance to layer up in the healthiest way, and that the way we're going to do that is by loving on kids. You literally, when you care for them in ways that resonate with development, in ways that resonate with emotional need, it's like you're reaching your hand into the core of that brain and instructing those neurons how to connect up. And when we can do that, we give kids the best possible shot. Okay, let's talk about who children are. Because this becomes really important in terms of sort of flavoring the reactions and interactions that we have with kids. When we think about who children are, what are some of the sort of biases that creep into our consciousness? What are some of the things that maybe don't creep into our consciousness but live subconsciously in us that are kind of flavoring how we're looking upon them and how our interactions with them go out? As those interactions go down, that really affects the experience that kids have of us holding them in mind, of us actually knowing them, right? And so those things, that's the drip, drop of everyday life that's going to really seep into them, become part of who they are neurologically and soulfully, and have a profound impact on the way that they grow up. There was this really interesting video produced, I don't know by who, we shared it on our Facebook page some time ago, about a little boy who they sort of chronicled his day as he boarded the school bus and then went off to school and all the interactions that he was having with the different adults in his day. Did anybody see this video? Yeah. And so he gets onto the school bus and he's this totally adorable little guy, and so he says hello to the school bus driver who's having a cranky pants day and kind of grumbles back at the kid, right? And then he gets to school, and you see the teacher in the classroom kind of harshly shushing the children and being annoyed, and then they're standing in lineup, and he gets in trouble for something that he wasn't even doing as they're trying to wait quietly outside the library, and then he goes to the cafeteria for lunch, and he can't remember his student numbers. The little lady working the cash register at the cafeteria then gets all barky at him, like how could he forget his student number, and doesn't he know that blah, 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 like all this stuff. So it's just, this is the drip, drop, drip, drop, drip, drop. And then right next to that, they played the same child going through the same day, but with all of the adults responding to that child in a really loving, caring way. Good mornings and understanding and hellos and no problems, and I'll look up your student number, try to remember it for next time. And the difference that makes, right? That's how the way that we look upon children, the way that we think about them, trickles down and becomes part of their everyday world. Now imagine that repeats every day for 25-ish years, right? How does that affect how you're formed? Like that really does have a big role in how your soul is going to get formed and how your brain is going to get formed. Let's look at some of the ways that we used to think about children, and in fact still think about children, because intergenerationally these biases get passed down to us whether we like to admit it or not, right? So let's go back to the beginning, when we used to think of children as coming into the world inherently evil. This is the original sin model. And so the child arrives and they're actually evil, and the job of the big people is to purge them of their evilness. Okay? So imagine that this is your view of children. How would this inform or shape or flavor the interactions that you have with them? It's not going to be great, like by today's standards, by the standards of everyone I'm assuming in this room, it's not going to be so great, right? If you think they're evil, you're coming down on them very hard, you're squashing them, there's no room for them to exist, child development wouldn't even be a thing in that kind of a model. You just need to get with the program or get out, right? And so this was a time when children were looked upon as being small adults, essentially. They were even clothed as small adults. They labored hard labor, as adults would do. They were punished. You stole a loaf of bread at 5, you got your hand chopped off. You were punished as an adult would be punished, right? Because there was no room for children to exist. That's the original sin model. Children are inherently evil. And then we walked along and came into a time when we call the tabula rasa approach to understanding children, which is that they are blank slates. And that we can make them into whatever we want to make them into, depending on how we form them, right? Is there room for the child to exist? Not really. It's still it's a very sort of top-heavy understanding of children, right? You're a blank slate, and I'm just gonna squish into you all the things that I want you to be, as opposed to creating room and space for you as your own unique, soulful being to exist, right? And then we went forward from there into the innate goodness model, which you know the pendulum swings. This is like the full circle from the original sin model. But the innate goodness period, in terms of us understanding children, also wasn't great, because it's what I call flowery meadows parenting, where you just like release them to the flowery meadows, to frolic in the sunshine and grow and blossom, right? And now we call that permissive parenting, and we know that it doesn't work out so well because children actually need rules and norms and expectations and all of the things that come with that. And so these are all of the different ways that we think about children and who children are. And as I sort of described, like, children are inherently evil. You all go, ah, that's so awful. Or, you know, children have no space to exist as their own soulful beings, and we're just going to squish into them all the things that we want them to be. And you all go, oh, that's so awful. And then we talk about innate goodness, and you have a chuckle at like how bizarro it is that we think we can just release them to the meadows and watch them blossom, because we all know that children need guidance and structure and all those kinds of things, right? So we all have a chuckle or sort of a recoiling reaction to these things, and yet, myself included, all of us have this inside of us when we look upon the children that we're loving. Every last one of us has that inside of us. Well, hello. And so the reality is that this has been passed along to us through generations. And hear me very clearly in this. You are innocent in having these biases inside of you. You didn't ask for them. You're carrying the biases of 3 or 4 or 8 or 1,000 generations in your subconscious psyche. Like, that's just how it works. It just gets passed along. So it's not that you are a horrible person, that you think these things about children. You're innocent in holding these views of children, but we have to call them to our collective conscience so that we can be aware that this happens. And how I like to sort of describe that is if you were to go stand in the lineup at any Walmart, okay, you watch a child start to kind of misbehave and act inappropriately in the checkout lineup because they want a candy, or they want this, or they want that, or their parents, you know, on their cell phone, and the children are becoming all activated by the disconnection that happens when that's going on. You watch the child start to misbehave, and you watch everybody else in the lineup behind that parent-child dyad. What are all those people thinking about that child and about that parent? All the stuff, right? A little bit of discipline would help. That spoiled little brat, somebody needs to get in charge of him, blah, blah, blah. Right? That's what we do, because that's all in our subconscious and our psyche, and it's been passed along to us for generations. Where we need to land with all of this is to make sure that we are checking that we are checking those biases, that we are forcing ourselves to be accountable to those thousands of generations, accountable to ourselves, and most importantly, accountable to the children that we are now growing up. Because our assumptions about them really do matter. The trickle down of that is going to have a profound impact on how they are formed over the days and months and years to come. And it is at our hands that they either benefit from a really yummy, juicy, awesome trickle down, or at our hands that they suffer the deleterious consequences of having their life flavored by big people who've held on to all those yucky, icky biases about who children are. So where we need to land is that children are soulful beings in the midst of the most profound and unique period of development in life, and it is our job as the big people upon whom those children are counting to do right by them. It is our job to make sure that how we flow into the interactions we have with them is really flavored by this kind of an understanding of the child, as opposed to all of those antiquated historical biases. Okay, let's talk about the role of the big people. Now, you are the big people. You are the caregivers. You are the parents. You are the neighbors. You are the teachers. You are the aunties. You are the uncles. You are the big people that are growing up, the little people, the children. Now, children view you as the big people as their ultimate protectors. So they come into the world looking for you. Why? Because they know they cannot even survive physically or emotionally unless they have some kind of a connection to you. And everything about development is going to drive at that because it's so important. Now, human beings, compared to any other mammalian species, have the longest period of dependency. Which means that we don't get to retire from growing them up. Until, like, the human brain actually doesn't reach full maturation until somewhere between age 25 and 30. Which is why you can, I don't know if it's still true, because I'm no longer in that age bracket. Not that you could tell. But you used to not be able to even rent a car until you're 25 years of age. Why? Because your prefrontal cortex wasn't fully formed, and they knew from an executive function standpoint you weren't going to be so awesome about planning and managing impulses, and so they didn't want to insure you on a car rental. That's what it is, because your brain isn't fully formed as a human being until you're somewhere between age 25 and 30. So we have a very long period of dependency on our big people, right? So we cannot retire too soon. The whole thing about this, this attachment, this connection, this relationship, is that it's so important to child development, to healthy child development, that it was given the name of attachment in the research world. And I just say hello to that. I haven't talked a lot about that word as we've been going through the morning. The reason that I haven't is, unfortunately, that word has become loaded in our pop culture with all sorts of connotations that really have nothing to do with what that word is, right? And so people say, oh, I'm an attachment parent, or I'm attachment parenting, or I believe in attachment in terms of understanding child development. And then what does the world think about you?
You're still sleeping with your 15-year-old.
You're a co-sleeper, yeah. You're still sleeping with them and breastfeeding them. Right? What else does the world think about you?
You baby them.
You're babying them, you're a helicopter parent, you mollycoddle. What else does the world think about you?
You need to get a life.
Say again, somebody over here?
You need to get a life.
You need to get a life.
Yeah. Of your own.
Somebody's got to get out more. They think you eat organic kale. You're from Salt Spring. You wear socks and Birkenstocks. Right? None of those things have anything to do with attachment. That's just all pop culture stuff. Attachment, the way that we're talking about it, is just about science. It's about science and how relationship becomes part of neural connections. That's what it is. And we know that the attachment relationship has to sort of play out or go down in a certain kind of way in order for that neural stuff in the brain to happen the way that nature intended. Now, children have but one job in this whole attachment interaction. Their one job is to seek it. Big people have but one job in this whole attachment interaction. Your one job is to provide it. And never, ever, ever should the two jobs get mixed up. I was in a session the other day with a parent who's arguably struggling in raising an adolescent child, and has some stuff from their own childhood that's crept into how they're now raising their adolescent. And this parent was sharing with me that he likes to alert his adolescent child to the way that that child has triggered him, because he has trauma from his own childhood. And the reason that he's sharing with his adolescent child how that child triggers him is because he doesn't want the child to feel responsible for the anger and explosiveness that's coming out of him, the dad, right? And so his logic is that if he says, well, it's not you, it's that you've landed on one of my triggers from my childhood trauma, then the child will be excused from feeling responsible for the father's anger. Do you follow the logic? How that actually plays out for the child is the child feels responsible for having triggered the father, right? Then the child feels worried that the father's decompensating and that the father's struggling with the things, the demons, affected by the father, experienced by the father from his childhood, right? So the child starts to feel worried about that. So then what does the child feel that they have to do? Fix it, caretake of, right? So who's now providing?
The child.
The child is providing for the father, right? And the roles have become reversed. Guess what the referral issue is in that case? This child won't listen to me. This child does nothing that I ask of him, her. This child is impossible to satiate. Like you can, it doesn't matter what I do, it's never enough. He, she's always coming flying back at me for more. They want more. What do they want? I took them and all their friends to a movie last night and it still wasn't enough. They still want more, right? So what's happened is the roles have been switched around. The child is now the provider and the parent, with the best of intentions, and we have to honor that, it came from a place of really good intention, has become the seeker. And because the role has been switched around, when the child is by nature meant to be the dependent, the child is by nature meant to be seeking, meant to be pursuing, meant to be being filled up, right? And so now the child is up here. Can the child be filled up ever? You can't be filled up when you're the provider, right? Will the child ever be satiated? No. When you're the provider, you're the one in the lead. Are you taking direction from your subordinate? Hell no! Right? Do you become an impossible child? A very challenging child to raise? Yes, you do, because the roles got switched around. The roles got reversed. And so there is this hierarchical nature to the big person, little person relationship, and that hierarchy needs to stay in place or things are going to be very, very challenging. Now, if you happen to be loving on a child for whom they've had early attachment ruptures, or attachment ruptures period, in the developmental span of childhood, that child will have been at one point in a position of very intense seeking, have realized that that wasn't working out for them. There was the rupture and the disconnections that come with all of that. They aren't going to just blow about in the wind and be like, oh, look at that, I don't have any big people. Oh, look at that, my significant attachment relationships have just dissolved. They're not going to do that because they're going to realize instinctively they need it. And so instead of blowing about in the wind and just hoping for the best, guess what they're going to do? They're going to step into the role of becoming their own provider. And they're going to make sure that you give to them what it is that they need. The problem is, when they're in that sort of mindset, they're in the lead of you. Not because you allowed it or created it or made it happen that way. It's just how it's going to play out. They're going to be in the lead because they're human beings. They have to do that to preserve their own soul, their own integrity, right? And so then your challenge becomes, how do you be in the lead of a child who's in the lead? And it's challenging, right? Can I hear an amen? It's challenging. And so we have to figure out how do we get in underneath that. And that we will talk about that in more detail in some of the workshops to come. Okay. All right. I feel like we've talked about all of this. All right, let's talk about what connection looks like through the years, because there is a way this kind of plays out over time. when life is going well and things are going down as they're supposed to go down, there is a way that the attachment will settle in, first superficially, and superficially not bad, it's just that that's where it begins. So this attachment, look at this baby. Blacked out. This baby is attaching through the senses, and that's the first level of attachment. It's not very deep, but it's the first level. And then as development proceeds and relationships deepen, we go into the second level, and the third level, and the fourth level, and the fifth, and then sixth level. The sixth level is the deepest level of attachment, and if everything has gone swimmingly well for that child in life, they will hit the fullest force of the sixth level in their 6th year of life. Now, if at any point things have gone sideways, they'll get hijacked in their development of the deepening attachment, and you can be 87 at the 2nd or 3rd level of attachment. Okay? So our job is always to figure out. Now the other thing about the way this plays out is that just because you come through the first year, where we're attaching primarily through the senses, as you're going to see in a moment, and let's say you've gotten to 3rd or 4th level, you never run out of your need for 1st level. Like, you're always going to want contact and closeness through physical proximity in the senses. You're going to want it. You're going to yearn for it. Like my boy who's coming home to me this afternoon. I mean, I want to just throw my arms around him and smell his smelly adolescent self. I can't wait for that. I really can't. Sort of. I'm hoping there's been a shower or two. Because you never run out of it. You always will want the earlier forms of it, but you also are benefiting from the deepest layers of it. So let's talk about what it looks like over the years. So in the first year, it's all about connection through being with. So that's why we have social policy in this country that allows caregivers to be at home with little babies for their first year of life. Because they connect, they attach through being with. It's all about touch and taste and smell and the sound of your voice and the sight of you, right? If you look at newborn infants who are hours old and you soak a breast pad on this side with the milk of their biological mother, and then you soak a breast pad on this side with the milk of somebody not their biological mother, from hours old they will orient to the breast pad soaked with the milk of their biological mother. Because it's that attachment through the senses. It's the smell of that. They know to be drawn to that, right? And even in utero, there's attaching that's happening through the sound of the voice and all of those kinds of things. So even if we have children who are removed from the care of their biological parent at birth, there's an attachment rupture that happens already then. Because we've already had in utero attachment happening through some of the senses, right? And so children connect through the concretes. Brains are changed in incredible ways by that input. And here's a quote from Bruce Perry. As babies are lovingly cared for, there is created a set of specific sensory stimuli, so how it's all landing on you from a sensory kind of place, that again, like literally soaks into your skin and becomes translated into specific neural activations. So the shush, 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 and the bouncing, and the snuggling, and the warmth, and all the care that comes with that, soaks into your body through your skin, travels on up into your brain, and becomes part of neural networks that are ultimately responsible for developing the bits of the brain that control for social emotional communication and bonding. So when we talk about being happy 30 years from now, when we talk about being able to engage in deep and meaningful relationships with other human beings 30 years from now, when we talk about being a contributing member of the world that we're living in 30 years from now, we're talking about making sure that that all gets soaked in by the baby, right? That's the first year. Now think about a child who's having a difficult time, and let's say they're struggling with some anxiety, some separation anxiety around all of that. And so it's time to go to bed, and what do they hate about bedtime? Being alone. being away from you because they're activated and they're vulnerable and they're feeling alarmed. And so they're going right back down to the basics. They want to attach through being with. Does it mean that you have to co-sleep? No, it doesn't mean you have to co-sleep. I had a dad at a workshop last night where he had been at a workshop of mine maybe about a year ago. And the one thing, he said he doesn't remember anything else about the workshop, which I tried not to take offense to. The one thing he said that he remembered was when I was talking about this attachment through being with and how important the smell part was, and that he wondered if he could take his stinky shirt that he had worn all day long and leave it with his 2-year-old who was having a hard time with sleeping and nighttime. And if he left it with his 2-year-old, would it change how the 2-year-old was sleeping? And he's like, it's like magic.
Yeah.
Like it changed everything. And so now the 2-year-old just sleeps with Daddy's shirt, Daddy's stinky, smelly shirt that he wore all day long. But it provides that sort of basic connection through the senses. So it's all about how do you be with when you can't be with. And so you be with the shirt if you can't be with the person in the shirt. Do you follow? Because it calls into mind the attachment through the senses. So first year is all about connection through being with. It is why a baby's cry should always be interpreted as an emergency, because they will be settled and soothed through the interaction of being with. We have to get back to them. And as they cry, and then we get back to them when we settle and soothe them through being with, contact and closeness and proximity, then their brains settle down 214 times a day. And guess what their neurons get really good at? Self-soothing. Like that's where it comes from. Self-soothing in a baby is a non-thing. We shouldn't even use that language for babies because it's not a thing. Co-regulation through the loving, nurturing care of the big people around the baby is what the thing is. Then we move on to the second year, when kids start to attach through being the same as. And so they start to sort of identify that we are an us, right? And they like the sense of us. In the second year of life, children still have not quite figured out that they are a separate being from their most important big people. They actually think they're the same being as you. So they really want to identify those commonalities and the sense of belonging that comes with the commonalities. Have you ever heard in terms of social psychology, birds of a feather flock together, right? And like attracts like we tend to like people who like us, all of those kinds of things. And so we have that sort of idea that we connect with people who are the same as us, and we find sort of our identity, our safety, our sense of belonging and closeness in the identification of those commonalities. Now I remember when my oldest son was about 2.5 years of age, and he realized that I do not have a penis. It was devastating. Right? And he cried, and he sobbed, and why don't I have a penis? He's asking me, can't you just grow one? And so we had big upset, and I had to support him through all of this. And then the next day, I'm down in the kitchen, and his dad is upstairs having a shower. And he has, I guess, been in the bathroom while his dad's been having the shower. And so he noticed some of the anatomical situation that's going down in the shower at that moment. And I hear his little feet come pattering down the stairs as he comes barreling into the kitchen. And he's like, Mom! And I was like, yeah, what's up? And he's like, Daddy has a penis. Like he was just so relieved that at least one of his big people had a penis. And I was like, yeah, I know. I know that that's how that works, my darling. So it's connection through being the same as. Now, I remember working with a girl whose mother had died from breast cancer. And she was about 8 or 9 years of age, 8 years of age, in fact, when that happened. And I was working with her doing some grief stuff. And we were talking one day about her mom and the kinds of interests and hobbies that her mom had had, which, lo and behold, were very similar to the interests and hobbies that the child had. And so I spent some time shining a light on that and talking with the child about, isn't it amazing that that part of your mom is inside you, like you're the same as her? which is part of just, even in the most catastrophic loss, still finding the common ground, still finding the connection through same-sies, through being the same as, and we can work to shine a light on that for children so that they can find their sense of belonging, their connection, and their attachment through all of that. Now, in the 3rd year of life, we start to connect through belonging and loyalty. And this really becomes about us versus them, and what that sort of feels like. It's, again, with every level, we're going deeper and deeper into the relationship, right? And so this has a deeper and more enduring quality. When we were looking at finding common ground in the 2nd year of life through same-sies, that sense of sameness really now has been internalized as belonging. You will see children, by the time they've hit this stage of attachment, they get very sort of drawn to and protective of that connection. So you watch any 3-year-old who's developing typically, and a new sibling arrives, it gets interesting, right? Because they're very protective of their existing connections, and there's a real sense of us versus them. And this is very much a part of what happens in the 3rd year of life. Now, what happens if you stagnate here? Like, what happens if the wheels fall off here? And then we fast forward to the teenage years. What are you more likely to get wrapped up in? What do you become vulnerable to? When your whole driving force is about belonging and loyalty.
Peer pressure.
Peer pressure. You get sucked into the vortex of your peers. What else might you become vulnerable to? When do most children who get gang involved become gang involved, right? And gangs and sort of the pack mentality around that, and the incredible sort of loyalty that they drive at as part of their gang culture is all about preying on the vulnerability of human beings who are stuck here, right? It's meeting the need, the attachment need here, but in a superficial and highly alarming kind of way. Now, in the 4th year, we move on from belonging and loyalty, and we start to attach through significance. And so we want, in our 4th year of life, to be meaningful. We want to know that we matter. We want to have the experience of have people being proud of us, so that we sort of know, like, they got us and they saw us and they thought we were rock stars. We want to have that feeling. We want to feel significance. We have the sense of being held in mind. That starts to emerge right here, right? That you can really land on that and really identify with that. Have you ever had a child who, like, 37 times a day will bring you their drawings for you to proclaim over how magical they are? They're looking for their connection through significance. That's why they're doing that over and over and over again, because they want to know that they matter. They want to feel like you're proud of them. They want to have that pride internalized inside of them. And so that's the 4th year. We go on from that into the 5th year, where we begin to actually feel love. What we would identify as the emotion, the emotion of love. And so it is in the 5th year, by the time the child is sort of traveling through the 5th year, that the child actually will give you their heart. Like, they're going to hand it over to you, knowing they can trust you with it if everything's gone well, right? And what you'll see is, very literally, they'll give you their hearts. They'll draw you hearts 37 times a day. They still, by the way, want you to also proclaim over the heart how magical it is, right? They'll give you their hearts. They'll talk about loving you. Freud landed up, you know, the Oedipus complex, or the boy who wants to marry his mother. That's all 5th year of life. Freud just misinterpreted it, right? And so you might find kids in the 5th year of life saying they want to marry you, because that's what they're identifying with as love. It's not romantic love, but they're getting that that's the connection, and that that involves love. And so the connection in the 5th year deepens down to the heart of the matter, and at this stage, it's when children fall deeply in love with us, okay? You might think that by the time you hit the stage of love, you've landed, right? But the reality is that the full force of the attachment has not occurred, has not developed until you hit the 6th year, the 6th stage, which is when we begin to attach and connect through being known. Now, think about when you are in a brand new dating relationship. And think about how that all plays out. You are in what I would refer to as image management mode. Where you're probably putting your best foot forward. You're making sure that by the time your date shows up at the door to pick you up, you're all perfectly coiffed and you've thought about your outfit and you've planned and sort of managed. You're in image management mode. You're not farting in front of them, right? You're kind of like making sure that it's all glossy, lovely, right? And so it's best foot forward. And then as the relationship deepens, some of the facade begins to fall off, right? But still you're not going full tilt with that. Like you're taking that slow. You're not dropping a stinky one in front of them until you've reached 6th stage probably, right? And then what happens is you fall in love with them. You might still be image managing even a little bit with the being in love stage in the 5th stage. And then it goes a little bit deeper. And that's when you start to feel the full impact of the attachment having taken hold. Because what happens when it goes a little bit deeper, you're connecting now not just through love, but through being known. Which is that you are known for the things that are glossy and lovely alongside all of the things that are not. And you are loved just the same. And it is only when we can feel that we are fully known that we get the full benefit of the deep, rich attachment connection, right? You have to be fully known. I had a family in my office yesterday, and I've known them for a long while, and I've been working with their daughter off and on, in fact, since she was about 4 years old, and she's 12 now. And they came in yesterday, and the mom comes in, and we're doing a little check-in, and she's like, so I have to tell you this thing. For the first time, she got in trouble at school. And I was like, oh dear, tell me what's happened. And so I guess there was some Snapchat conversation that went down where some words were exchanged, and the child didn't really know what the words meant, and so had kind of jumped on the bandwagon of the words, and then, you know, like you get sort of where that goes, and one thing led to another. The problem is that she wasn't supposed to have Snapchat. And so somehow she had snuck it onto her phone without her mom having known about it. And then this whole thing went down, and the principal at the school found out that this child had been involved in this group chat that had gone sideways. But the mom didn't know yet. So the mom didn't know, A, that the child had Snapchat, or B, that this situation had occurred. And so the child comes home from school and is sort of like circling around. And the mom's like, what's going on? Like there's clear, like this is a child who's seeking. You understand she's alarmed, and so she's seeking, so she's circling around her mom. And the mom's trying to figure out, like, what is it that's going on? Why is she being so interesting today after school? And finally the child, she literally cannot hang on to it for another second. She just can't. She's like, you might get a call from the principal. And the mom was like, okay, what's happened? Well, there was a conversation about possibly getting into a fight. And the mom was like, okay. And so they started chat about what was the social dynamic that had led to that conversation. And then the child, she takes it one step further. She's like, and the conversation happened on Snapchat on my phone. Right? Where she's like, please just know me. Please just know everything about me, so I can finally feel settled and resolved and how awful and gross I feel, because right now, before telling you this, I feel really disconnected from you, which is why she's in this like pursuit mode, circling around her mom. She's feeling all disconnected. And she just has to share everything so that she can feel known again. Secrets are always full of separation, right? And so if somebody doesn't fully know us, we worry that we might be too much for them. We might overwhelm them. They might no longer love us if they fully knew us, if they knew sort of the dark side of us, the difficult things about us, our faults and weaknesses along with our glowing strengths and the things that make us sparkle. And so it isn't until this 6th year that we really sort of dig down and get to feel the full effects of what it is to be deeply connected and attached. Now, you can be arrested, as I said, at any stage in there, right? And you will never do away with your need for the earlier phases of attachment development. You'll always want that. You'll always want to go there. There is a rhythm and a pattern to how the attachment relationship develops, and keeping in mind that that is a process, and so you do have to kind of travel through it. And if it gets interrupted, you have to go back and fill in the missing pieces before you can then progress through to the next level. And your challenge in all of this is to focus not on the age and stage of the child, but on the process, where they're at in the process, and coming alongside them to help them find their way through, right? Now, what I'd like to do is sort of switch gears a little bit and talk about what happens when the child goes into survival mode. What happens when the heart doesn't get what the heart needs and it becomes wounded, and we start to see the wheels fall off of this sort of developmental progression through the development of the attachment stages and the foundations of all of that. What's that going to look like in the child, and then what kinds of things do we have to be keeping in mind as we work to support them? I feel like I'm just sort of looking around the room. I'm wondering if we take 5 minutes right now. If you need to fill your cup of coffee, fill your cup of coffee. If you need to run really quick, the heart looks like in survival mode, and some of the things that can push it to there. Very quickly, I mean, there's like a million gazillion things that can push a child's heart into survival mode. 9.9 times out of 10, when you're loving on a child who's struggling, you're not really going to know fully all of the things that pushed them into survival mode. And so you just got to keep the faith. You got to understand that underneath this crusty, difficult, challenging child is a heart that's in survival mode, and it was pushed there by things that just became too much for the child's heart to handle. So what are those things? Well, interrupted relationships, right? Even from birth, interrupted relationships can push a heart into survival mode. Children who are dealing with developmental exceptionalities, the world is not a terribly kind place for a child who's growing up with developmental exceptionalities, and so that becomes very wounding and can push the heart into survival mode. Children who have a high level of sensitivity, and so they have a sensitive kind of temperament emotionally and or sensorially, where lights and textures and tastes and other things are just really offensive to them. Guess by nature who are the most sensitive ducks among us? The kids who've had the difficult start. Right? They develop these heightened sensitivities as a protective mechanism. The more on alert you are and the more sensitized you are to everything, then the better you will be able to survive it. But woo, the more offensive your world is, right? And so those high levels of sensitivity, adults who aren't in charge, and we talked about when the dynamic gets flipped around and the child becomes provider and how that's so alarming, and that child will never be in a place of emotional rest, and so that's a difficult spot for them. Kids who have too much time away from their key caregivers, where they can't hang on to them enough and they need that sensory-based being with kind of connection. Kids who've experienced neglect. Kids who either have had an experience of, come into an understanding of, just as part of normal development, an understanding of, or a perception of death, because death is a big disconnection and it's alarming. Kids who experience not being accepted, a lack of trust in the big people to actually get them and be there for them. Kids who have a sense of having not been welcomed to exist. Kids who have difficult experiences, disappointments that overwhelm or become catastrophic, things that don't work. Kids who've had too much change too quickly, it overwhelms them and floods them. Or even kids who have a fear of being too much to handle, too big and mad, too large and in charge. Like, what if you're too much? What if your people really can't handle you, right? Or on the flip side, kids who have a fear of not being enough. What if I don't matter enough? I remember working with one family, and there was a psychologist involved on appointment from the courts who was doing sort of a bird's eye view and had come into a first interaction with the child, watching the child with the non-custodial parent, and made some comment to me in a follow-up phone call after that initial observation of the child, how like really well adjusted this child was. And I was like, are you on crack? Like there's nothing about this that's well adjusted. So then I was like, well, pray tell, like where is this coming from? Like what is it that you saw? And the psychologist described seeing in the child this child who's just sunshine and roses and so accommodating and so willing to come alongside and do what it is that she's told, and you know, like just this like little child. Well, why is that child being that way? She is working so hard to be enough, right? She's working so hard. She's providing for her parent who can't really handle anything else outside of sunshine and roses, right? She's working to take care of all that and sparkle all around it so that she can be just enough, right? Which isn't, this is not a child who's well adjusted. This actually is a child for whom the bottom's fallen out of it. Now, were you to see that child outside of that 1 hour? Were you to see that child in my office a month ago when I got the quick phone call from the front desk, you need to get out to the waiting room now, right? And I was like, oh, but I have 5 minutes. You don't have 5 minutes, right? Because this very well-adjusted Sunshine and Roses child is losing her ever-loving mind in the waiting room because there was a transition that didn't go exactly as planned at 3:02 that afternoon, right? And so that's not a well-adjusted child. And the reason that I tell you the story is because don't be fooled sometimes by this facade of kids who look like they're really holding it together. When they're holding it together from a place of survival, that's not a high-functioning child. I mean, that's a remarkably adaptive child. Like hashtag respect for what's going on there. That's incredible that you can adapt that way, but oh my gosh, the cost that the child carries for having had to go there.
Yes. What happens when you never see a child like that fall apart? Like what happens when they just when they never let go?
I'm not sure that I follow.
Like for instance, like I had a child here at 8. Now she's 15, and I have like never. She's not with me still, but I am still part of. I've not seen her ever.
She's holding it together.
Yeah, she's
all
holding
the
it together
time. She
too
never.
well, except for a couple of Fs this year. Like that was it.
A couple of Fs at school.
Yeah.
And so, is your sense that that's a facade, or is your sense that she's actually kind of doing okay?
No, since she was 8, it was my sense that she was just kind of trying to keep it together, keep herself under the radar, keep everybody else happy.
If it is indeed a facade, it's because she hasn't landed somewhere long enough and safe enough to be able to let it all go. If it is a facade and she's held onto it for this long, my guess is she's extraordinarily sensitive. That she's been able to manage that for that long, probably very bright and very resourceful that she's been able to hold on to it for that long. And what I would hope for her is that there would be some kind of an enduring connection that will allow her at some point, and my guess is, I don't have a crystal ball, my guess is it'll happen in one of 2 spots in her development in future. Young adulthood, as she makes her big forays out into the world and becomes alarmed by that. And or when she has her first child. But I don't know. And it's true, you know, like there will be people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s who will never ever have let the mask fall. And what a challenging life to live. And what a gift to create the kind of space for a human being to exist where they don't have to wear their mask anymore. Let's talk about what survival mode can look like. So, when a child's in survival mode, mean, you're gonna see a million different things. This is just a flavor. The ante is up. They look to other inappropriate sources of attachment and connection. So you might see a lot of sexualization and getting involved in sensorial relationships that way, where they're seeking on a senses level by becoming sort of very active sexually and not in a safe kind of way. A child who's always hungry, you can never satiate them. They can't be taken care of that way. A child who appears not to care. Do they really not care? No. It's just a protective mechanism, right? A child who cannot see danger. Children often can't see danger in social settings, see danger in other kinds of settings because they're numbed out and tuned out. They've had to turn off all of their emotions in order to preserve their soul's integrity. And so now they literally are like, oh, that looks fun. When really it's not fun at all. It's very dangerous and not safe. But they can't see that because they've turned everything off in order to preserve themselves. They can come across as quite bossy. Why? Because they're in the lead. They're large and in charge, right? They can appear very vigilant and sensitive because if you're not sure what threat might be lurking around the corner, emotional, physical, or otherwise, you are well advised to be heightened to potential threat, remain vigilant, get very sensitive because this will preserve you, right? Difficulties with either intense focus on specific things or not enough focus, right? So either the scan and search kind of brain that's looking for danger, so you look very inattentive and unable to focus, or you become hyper-focused on things to the exclusion of everything around you. A child who's easily overwhelmed, a child who's appearing agitated, on edge, or restless because your alarm systems will be heightened when you're in survival mode, when your heart hasn't gotten what it's needed, what it needs. Sleep gets disrupted, again, because your alarm systems are heightened. You are meant to be vigilant, not at rest. And so sleep gets interrupted as a result. Aggression can become high because you have to discharge all of that stuff that's festering on the inside, so you will be acting out. Frustration will be high, your coping resources are low, and so you're going to not tolerate things that are challenging or frustrating. Alarm is high, you can become quite fearful of different things even when no obvious threat is present. You can look pretty intrusive because you start to miss the social cueing as a result of being numbed out and tuned out, so you aren't really picking up what other people are putting down in terms of social messaging, so you can kind of look and feel intrusive. And you can appear sometimes precocious or too independent. And then we have, people being like, oh, they're doing really well. And I'm always like, no, this is not really well. This is the problem. This is the problem. They're too independent because they're in charge. They're in the lead. We need to invite them to depend and to rest on us. Now, as we've gone through the day, you might be starting to get worried that you've created some of this in the children that you are loving on, right? Because I've been full of the message all morning that if the big people are doing right by the kids, then the kids will be just fine. And so the challenge is that it isn't bad big people that always push children into survival mode. Sometimes it is, if we're going to be really honest about that. And I'm sure many of you will know stories of bad big people who push children into survival mode, right? However, always when we have a child who is at rest, we can be assured and guaranteed of one thing. The child who is at rest will be surrounded by big people who are attuned and insightful. So it doesn't mean that big people have caused the child to be in the space that they're in. It might possibly mean that. But it doesn't mean that you did that. Do you understand? It doesn't mean that you need to hold yourselves responsible, but then you need to hold yourselves responsible. So it's not that you created it, but rather that you are the answer to it. And so when we see children who are at rest, we know that they are surrounded by attuned and insightful big people, and ultimately, that is what we want. That's what we want to gift all of the children that we are growing up, all of the children whose lives we are invested in, the kids that we are caring for. We want to gift them that. We want to gift them the experience, even if it's just for a short while, of having been surrounded by an attuned and insightful big person. Because when you gift them that experience, you live on in their neurons, and you become part of them for the rest of their life's course as the brain continues to grow and develop.
Survival mode could happen in a rupture between the first and the sixth year of brain development.
Yes, but survival mode can also happen after that. So the first 6 years being very important in terms of how the attachment relationship develops. But if at any point after that, as a child, you suffer catastrophic loss or some other catastrophic life event or experience, that is not then resolved in the caring presence of the big people who are loving on you, the wheels can fall off for you then too. And so that's when we look at trauma and the experience of trauma, that's how that can start to sort of soak in. And again, it's not even necessarily that the big people have caused that to happen, right? We may have a child who at age 12, 13, 16, 18 experiences some kind of significant trauma, and you can see them get pushed into survival mode. Was it your fault that the trauma occurred? No. But is it your fault that the trauma occurred? Yes. Because they view you as their ultimate protectors. And so even if you had nothing to do with any of that, at the end of the day, in their psyche, in their subconscious, it comes back to you to be the protector and to fix it, right? And so even if all of that plays out really beautifully in the first 6 years, you can still have catastrophic loss, trauma, other life experiences that can derail it if it's not resolved. Does that make sense?
Yes, and also the degree of the survival mode would vary from one to the other in terms of how they got captured in the developmental stage.
Absolutely. So the degree of the survival mode will vary from one child to the other, depending on when and how and what happened in terms of the ruptures and the experiences, because it's all in the eye of the beholder. It's all about perception rather than the concretes. And so let's say you have a child who is incredibly intense and sensitive compared to a child who temperamentally is a little bit more sort of easygoing, same age and stage, same life circumstances, same everything, that's going to look night and day different in each of those children, right? And so yes, incredible individual variability. Now let's talk about the 4 guiding principles of what it is that children need in order to grow up in the best possible way, and then we'll be getting close to wrapping our morning up. We're going to talk about these principles. If you've ever been around me before in terms of attending workshops or talks or things like that, you will know that I try very hard to never, ever, ever tell you what to do with your kids. If I'm the kind of psychologist who gives you like the magic list of 3 steps for how you're going to manage this stuff with your kids, I've just failed you. Because it doesn't work that way. It's not going to work that way. That's not how it goes down, for precisely the reasons that we've just talked about in answer to your question. Because every child is their own highly unique, exceptional self. And there is no one size fits all. And the question should never be about what you're supposed to do. Don't ever ask yourselves the question, what am I supposed to do when the child blah, 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 blah. That's not the question. The question is, how are you meant to be? What's the energy you bring to the interaction? What's the swagger that you need to have going on all around you as you come into that interaction, right? How are you meant to be? And then the to-dos will flow very naturally from how it is that you are being. You don't need me to give you a list of steps and strategies. If I give you a list of steps and strategies, you should fire me. You should never ever listen to somebody who's giving you lists of steps and strategies. They are doing you wrong. It's never going to work. Ideas, perhaps, of how to manifest the being, but never cold, hard, concrete lists of steps and strategies. So let's talk about these 4 guiding principles, which will give you a sense of what the being looks like when we're around our children. Guiding principle number 1 is this, in terms of what all children need. Not what they want, but what they need. Kids need connection security. That connection security will ultimately result in maturity, true maturity, the kind of maturity that bubbles up from deep inside the child at like a cellular level and comes tumbling out of them as an emergent desire to exist in this world and to rock it out. That's what true maturity looks like. True maturity is not a child who's masquerading around, doing the things they've been told to do and performing because they're afraid of getting in trouble, or they're afraid of not pleasing you, or they're afraid of not meeting the expectation. That's not true maturity. That's like fake. It's fake maturity, fake independence, not real. How do you get a child to the place of being truly mature, truly independent? You invite them to be deeply dependent upon you. Full stop. But are we mollycoddling them? Isn't it helicopter parenting? What if? Are we creating the greedy gimmies in them? Won't they be just then deeply dependent upon us forever? No, that's not how development works. The brain yearns to move forward, yearns to become its own independent soul and self, right? It wants to move there. You give that child the opportunity to be deeply dependent upon you, and one day that child's going to turn around and let you know very definitively they have arrived. Right? And then when they do, as an attuned and insightful big person, you're going to take a step back. And you're going to be watching them and saying things like, there you are. Off you go. Right? The helicopter parent in that moment goes, oh, no. It's okay, I'll do it anyways. Right? And so invite them to be deeply dependent upon you. If you have a child who is struggling and the world is all around you saying, no, let them go, push them, independence, blah, blah, you shush them. You shush them all. You tell them to meet you at the bike racks after school. Don't tell them that. We'll never solve our problems with our hands. You tell them Dr. Vanessa said so. And you just like scoop them up, and you keep them close to you, and you have them be fully dependent upon you, because that's what they will need. They will never ever be able to come to a place of full rest and then sort of blossom forward from there and become their full selves if you haven't created that space for them. And the world is going to rail against you for doing so, because the world doesn't get it. The world is focused on independence in a weird, perseverative, obsessive, compulsive kind of way. That, by the way, comes out of our own fear and shame as parents and big people. We want children to look independent, because then we feel like people then won't judge us. So we have to, but you're not here in the service of any of that. You're here in the service of that child. And you be fierce about that. Guiding principle number 2. Big people need to ensure that little cups are overflowing. You give them more of you than they could ever possibly want or need, and then give them a little more than that. And then you'll be golden. Then they will venture forth. Then they will be able to sort of head out and do and be and see and conquer, knowing they have this secure base, you, the attachment provider, right? Because you filled them up. They never have to want for it. They don't have to seek after it. They don't have to drive after it. They don't have to be in the lead of it or in charge of it, because you've just provided it for them. How do you create the drip, drop, drip, drop, drip, drop of the everyday life for a child so that they feel like they're overflowing? How do you make sure they have enough of you? How do you be with them even when you can't be with them? How do you just come in all around them? Connection, connection, connection. Connection in how you say hello in the mornings. Connection in how you do mornings in your home. Connection in how you do after school. Connection in how you do meals. Connection in how you do discipline. Connection in like every single aspect of that child's life. How do you fill it full of connection so their cups are overflowing with it, so they don't need to drive after it and spend all of their energy driving after it, keeping them from using that energy to direct towards growing up and maturing, right? Make sure their cups are overflowing. Guiding principle number 3, you have to know, even if you have no idea. You just have to know, right? They are looking to you. And if they sense in you this energy of like, oh dear, what is this? I don't know what to do with that. right? They sense that kind of like tentative energy in you where they know that you don't really know what's going on, or you don't really have control of this, or you're not really in charge, or you don't really have the information. If you flow into it, not with swagger, which is you've got it all kind of going on, but if you flow into it and you're like, I don't know, they're going to smell that from a mile away, and it freaks them out because their very existence depends on you. So what if you're like uncertain?
Fake it.
You fake it till you make it, absolutely, right? Because if you don't, it's highly alarming to them. That's a very alarming experience. And so you have to be full of swagger. And it isn't that you have to know all of the answers, because it is impossible in life to know all of the answers, but rather that you have to be their answer. That you have to flow into the interactions you have with them, full of all of that swagger, so that they know you are big, and that you get it, and that you've got it, and that you can keep bringing it and getting it because you're their big person. You got some swagger, right? And then guiding principle number 4, the bottom line always comes down to connection. Do nothing, be nothing, say nothing that's going to get in the way of the child's experience of you as being the big person to whom they are connected. You want them to experience you as the kind of big person who gets them and has their back and is picking up what they're putting down. Do nothing that interrupts that. It doesn't mean that you cannot have boundaries. It doesn't mean that you cannot have rules, norms, expectations, those kinds of things. This is not Flowery Meadows parenting. It doesn't mean that you let go of all of those things, but as you're holding on to those things, that you do so with kindness, that you do so with compassion, that you avoid all of the sort of wounding approaches that would have the child experiencing you not as somebody who's relationally focused, but rather as someone who's power-driven, right? And instead, flow into holding the line with lots of care, lots of kindness, lots of compassion, so that they know bottom line is always relationship. It always comes down to that. Do nothing, say nothing, be nothing. It gets in the way of the relationship taking hold. And so, when a child is held in mind, the child feels it and knows it. There is a sense of safety, of containment, and most important, existence in that other, which is vital. It seems to me that one of life's greatest privileges is just that, the experience of being held in someone's mind. And perhaps the greatest gift that we can give any child in being part of growing them up is the experience of being wholly, profoundly, deeply, fully known. And when you can do that, when you can surround them with that kind of a daily experience in the drip drop, drip drop, drip drop of life, that's a child whose heart and soul is going to come alive. That's a child who 30 years from now is going to be living the dream.
What about that Prince Rupert?